Blood is thicker than water, but revenge pairs perfectly with a $500 bottle of Cabernet. My family thought it was hilarious to publicly humiliate me and stick me with a $3,000 dinner bill at the restaurant they managed. So I bought the building and their employment contracts. If you looked up Golden Child in the dictionary, you would find a high-resolution, professionally retouched photograph of my older brother Thomas. For as long as I can remember, the sun, the moon, and the stars revolved entirely around him in the Clare household. My parents, Barbara and Richard, made no secret of their preferences. When Thomas graduated high school, with a perfectly average 2.4 GPA, my parents threw him a catered backyard gala and bought him a brand new Jeep. When I graduated 3 years later as valedictorian, my mother handed me a gift card to Olive Garden and told me not to let the academic success go to my head. My name's Clara. I spent my entire life as the invisible girl, the baseline against which Thomas's mediocre achievements could be artificially elevated. I realized early on that seeking their validation was a losing game, so I stopped playing. Instead, I poured my energy into computers, coding, and business. I moved out at 18, worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, and started a B2B software company out of a tiny, damp apartment. By the time I was 30, I had quietly sold my first startup for $12 million and had already launched a second venture capital firm focused on tech acquisitions. I was wealthy, not just comfortable. I had buy a private island if I feel like it money. But I never told my family. Why? Because the few times I had tried to share my early milestones, they either dismissed them or, worse, asked for loans to bail Thomas out of his latest disaster. To my parents, I was just Clara, who does something with computers and IT support. I let them believe I was scraping by. It was safer that way. Thomas, meanwhile, was a spectacular failure, failing upward. He possessed a terrifying amount of unearned confidence and a jawline that convinced people he was competent. He bounced from failed real estate ventures to multi-level marketing schemes, always funded by my parents' dwindling retirement savings. Eventually, he met and married Amelia. Amelia was a terrifying match for my brother. She came from a family of old money that had entirely run out of actual money, leaving her with nothing but a devastating superiority complex and a taste for designer shoes she couldn't afford. Through a distant connection of Amelia's, Thomas somehow talked his way into a management position at El Ora, one of the most exclusive, pretentious, and ridiculously expensive restaurants in the city. Within a year, the previous general manager quit in frustration, and Thomas, by sheer proximity and smooth talking, was promoted to GM. Amelia naturally was hired as the in-house sommelier and private events coordinator, despite her only qualification being that she drank a lot of expensive wine. The promotion was the biggest event in Clare family history. My mother treated it as though Thomas had just been elected to the Senate. That's when my phone rang. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in the middle of reviewing a quarterly earnings report for one of my portfolio companies. "Clara," my mother's voice crackled through the speaker, crisp and demanding. "We are celebrating your brother's monumental promotion this Friday at Laura. 8 o'clock. Don't be late, and please wear something appropriate. It's a 5-star establishment, not one of your little internet cafes." I closed my laptop and rubbed my temples. "Unhappy for Thomas, Mom. I'll be there." "Good. Thomas has arranged a private table for us. He practically runs the entire city's culinary scene now, you know. Arthur Sterling, the owner, relies on him for everything." She paused, her tone dropping into that familiar, condescending register. "It'll be nice for you to see what real ambition looks like, Clara. Maybe it will inspire you to get a steady job with benefits." "I'll see you Friday, Mom," I said softly, ending the call. I should have said no. I should have stayed home, ordered takeout, and enjoyed the peace of my penthouse apartment. But a small, foolish part of me, the inner child that still wanted her family to love her, hoped that maybe, just maybe, This dinner could be a turning point. Maybe we could just be a family celebrating a milestone without the toxic comparisons. I was so incredibly wrong. Friday evening arrived. I decided to dress understated but elegant, a simple tailored black dress, pearl earrings, and a trench coat. I drove my modest sedan, purposely leaving my Porsche in the garage, and handed the keys to the valet at Laura. The restaurant was visually stunning, I had to admit. It was all vaulted ceilings, modern crystal chandeliers, and dark velvet booths. The air smelled of truffles, reduction sauces, and aggressively expensive perfume. The hostess led me to a prime corner table where my parents were already seated. Thomas and Amelia were standing by the table, holding flutes of champagne, holding court as if they were royalty greeting their subject. Thomas wore a custom suit that I knew cost more than his monthly salary, and Amelia was draped in silk. "Clara, you made it," Thomas boomed, projecting his voice so the neighboring tables could hear. He didn't hug me, he just gestured to me with his champagne flute. "Welcome to my empire. It's beautiful, Thomas." "Congratulations on the GM position," I said genuinely, taking my seat next to my father, who gave me a brief, non-committal nod. "Well, it takes a certain kind of visionary to manage an establishment of this caliber," Thomas said, sliding into the booth next to Amelia. "Mr. Sterling, the owner, basically begged me to take the reins. The place was falling apart before I stepped up." "They hope not," Amelia chimed in, adjusting a diamond tennis bracelet that I suspected was heavily financed. "It's true. Thomas has completely revitalized the staff, and I've entirely overhauled the wine cellar. You wouldn't understand, Clara, but curating a world-class wine list requires a highly refined palate." "I'm sure it does," I smiled politely, unfolding my linen napkin. The dinner that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every conversation was a thinly veiled opportunity to elevate Thomas and diminish me. When the waiter brought out the appetizers, seared scallops with a caviar foam, my mother looked at me pitifully. "Enjoy this, Clara. I know you usually just eat microwave meals while staring at your computer screens. It's a treat for you to experience how the other half lives," Barbara said, patting my hand. I took a slow breath. "Actually, Mom, I cook quite a bit at home." "Oh, please," Thomas scoffed, swirling his wine. "Don't pretend you know anything about fine dining." "Amelia, didn't Clara ask for ketchup at a steakhouse once when we were teenagers?" "I think she did," Amelia giggled maliciously. Midway through the main course, a dry-aged Wagyu ribeye that was admittedly fantastic, an older gentleman in a tweed blazer approached our table. Thomas immediately stood up, his posture transforming from arrogant to aggressively sycophantic. "Mr. Sterling." "Sir, wonderful to see you," Thomas beamed. Arthur Sterling, a man who looked perpetually exhausted, offered a tight smile. "Thomas, enjoying the evening?" "Immensely, sir. Just celebrating with the family. This is my mother, Barbara, my father, Richard, and my wife, Amelia, who you know." Thomas gestured to everyone, then pointedly paused before gesturing to me. "And this is my little sister, Clara. She works in IT. Tries her best." "Mr. Sterling offered a polite nod to me. "A pleasure, Clara. Thomas speaks frequently of himself. Enjoy the meal." He quickly excused himself, clearly not wanting to linger. "See that?" Thomas sat down, puffed up like a peacock. "The owner practically eats out of the palm of my hand. He's an old guy, losing his touch. I'm the one keeping this ship afloat." The absolute delusion was staggering. But I kept quiet, ate my food, and waited for the night to end. Then came dessert, and with dessert came the check. The waiter approached Thomas, respectfully placing the sleek black leather folder next to him. Thomas didn't even open it. With a practiced dramatic sigh, he picked up the folder and casually tossed it across the table. It landed directly in front of my plate. I stared at the black leather. "What's this, Thomas?" Thomas smirked, leaning back and resting his arm around Amelia. "Well, Clara, Since Mom and Dad paid for my college, and since Amelia and I are practically hosting you in our establishment, we thought it would be a nice gesture for you to pick up the tab. Call it a thank you to the family." My mother chimed in immediately, her voice sharp. "It's the least you could do, Clara. Thomas has worked so hard for this promotion. You don't have a husband, you don't have children, you don't have a mortgage on a real house. You have virtually no expenses. It's time you contributed." My father stared intensely at his water glass, cowardly avoiding my gaze. I opened the folder. The bill, itemized with 4 bottles of vintage wine Amelia had curated for the table, Wagyu beef, truffles, and a massive gratuity Thomas had pre-added for his staff, came to exactly $3,245.80. They had planned this. The entire dinner wasn't to celebrate. It was to use me as a walking ATM while simultaneously making me feel like a charity case. They honestly believed I was a struggling IT worker, yet they were perfectly comfortable draining what they assumed was my entire bank account just to humiliate me. I looked up. Thomas was grinning. Amelia was sipping her espresso, watching me with undisguised amusement. My mother looked defiant. $3,200, I said, my voice deadpan. "You want me to pay for your celebration dinner? If you can't afford it, Clara, just say so," Thomas mocked, his voice dripping with faux pity. "I can ask the kitchen if they need someone to wash dishes. Or I guess I can just cover it like I always cover everything for this family." A hot, searing anger bloomed in my chest. Not the chaotic, screaming kind of anger. This was cold, calculating. It was the exact kind of calm clarity I felt right before negotiating a multi-million-dollar buyout. "No need, Thomas," I said quietly. I reached into my purse, pulled out my sleek, heavy metal American Express Centurion card, the infamous black card, and placed it perfectly in the center of the leather folder. Amelia's eyes widened slightly as she caught a glimpse of the heavy black titanium. But she didn't know enough to fully recognize what it was. Thomas just laughed. "Putting it on credit, huh? Don't let the interest rates drown you, sis." The waiter took the book, processed the payment, and returned. I signed the receipt, stood up, and looked at my family. "Congratulations on the promotion, Thomas. The food was excellent. Have a wonderful night," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I walked out of Laura, got into my car, and drove home in total silence. I didn't cry. I was completely done crying over these people. The next morning, I woke up at 6 a.m., poured myself a cup of black coffee, and opened my laptop. I didn't log into my usual private equity dashboard. Instead, I pulled up the public business registries, tax records, and real estate databases for the city of Chicago. Thomas had claimed he was the one keeping Laura afloat. He claimed Arthur Sterling was losing his touch. I wanted to see the numbers. With my background in data aggregation, it took me less than 2 hours to build a complete financial profile of the restaurant and its owner. The truth was staggering. Laura wasn't just struggling, it was hemorrhaging money. The restaurant was operating at a massive monthly deficit. Arthur Sterling was over-leveraged, holding 2 mortgages on the historic building the restaurant occupied, and was facing imminent foreclosure within the next 90 days. The previous GM hadn't quit. He had abandoned a sinking ship. Thomas hadn't been hired for his vision. He had been hired because he was cheap, gullible, and willing to work for a title rather than a competitive salary. Sterling was desperate. He was quietly shopping the property and the restaurant's brand to private equity firms, hoping for a discreet buyout to save him from public bankruptcy. I sat back in my chair, sipping my coffee as a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. My brother wanted to act like a king in his little castle. He wanted to humiliate me in front of his staff and our parents. He wanted to stick me with the bill. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line to my lead acquisitions attorney, David. "David," I said as soon as he answered, "I need you to look into a commercial property in the downtown dining district. A restaurant called Laura. The owner is Arthur Sterling." "Good morning to you too, Clara," David chuckled. looking to diversify into hospitality. No, I replied, my eyes locked on the screen showing Thomas's arrogant face on the Restaurants About Us page. I'm looking to buy a very specific asset. Sterling is underwater. I want to offer him a lifeline. I want to buy the building, the restaurant, the brand, and all employee contracts. Understood. What's our timeline? I want the keys, the deed, and full operational control by the end of the month, I stated. And David, make sure it's structured under my holding company. I don't want the staff or management knowing who the new owner is until I'm ready to introduce myself. I'll have the preliminary paperwork drafted by noon, David said. I hung up the phone. I had paid $245.80 for dinner. I was about to pay $4.5 million for the ultimate dessert. The acquisition of Allura took exactly 22 days. When an owner is drowning in debt and facing public humiliation, they rarely haggle over a clean all-cash offer that quietly makes their problems disappear. Arthur Sterling signed the papers in my lawyer's downtown office. He looked 10 years younger the moment the ink dried. I don't know who you really are or what your holding company plans to do with the place, Arthur said, shaking my hand before he left, but keep an eye on the management. I let the inmates run the asylum for too long. Don't worry, Arthur, I smiled warmly. I plan on doing a complete house cleaning. Under the terms of the sale, the staff was notified that a private equity firm, Apex Horizon Holdings, had purchased the restaurant. Operations were to continue as normal while the new ownership conducted a comprehensive internal audit. My name was nowhere on the public documents. As far as anyone knew, Laura was now owned by a faceless bureaucratic corporate entity based out of Delaware. The audit was glorious. I hired a specialized forensic accounting team to comb through every receipt, invoice, and inventory log from the past 18 months. I wanted to know exactly how my brother was running his empire. The reality was worse than I could have imagined. Thomas wasn't just incompetent. He was treating the restaurant like his own personal slush fund. The data painted a picture of absolute negligence. Thomas was aggressively comping meals for his and Amelia's friends to create the illusion of a packed, exclusive dining room. Food costs were through the roof because he was approving orders for premium ingredients from unvatted, overpriced lenders who were likely giving him kickbacks. The staff turnover rate was at 70%. Waiters and kitchen staff were quitting in droves because Thomas routinely verbally abused them and manipulated their tip pools to cover register shortages. Amelia's curated wine cellar was an even bigger disaster. The audit revealed that she had been purchasing cases of mid-tier wines, slapping counterfeit vintage labels on them, and charging patrons astronomical markups. The difference in cost? She was pocketing it directly through a shellbender account. It was textbook embezzlement, sprinkled with federal fraud. While I was reviewing the damning files in my penthouse, my mother called. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice neutral. Clara, have you heard the news? Barbara's voice was practically vibrating with excitement. What news, Mom? Thomas's restaurant was bought out by a massive corporate firm. Apex something. They're billionaires, Clara. Billionaires. She paused to let that sink in, fully expecting me to be intimidated. Thomas says they bought the place specifically because of his performance metric. They want to take his management style national. I had to bite the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood to keep from laughing out loud. Thomas had looked at an impending corporate audit and somehow convinced himself it was a scouting mission for a promotion. Wow, that's incredible, I managed to say. It is, and Thomas is being so gracious. The new ownership has called a mandatory all-hands staff meeting for this Friday morning. The CEO is flying in personally to meet him. Thomas is officially being named Regional Director of Hospitality. He even secured permission for your father and me to be there to take photos. He invited you to a corporate staff meeting? I asked, raising an eyebrow at my phone. It's a coronation, Clara, she corrected me sharply. We wouldn't understand corporate ladder dynamics. Anyway, I just called to tell you. I know it's during your working hours, but if you want to take a sick day to come and see what real success looks like, you're welcome to stand in the back. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Mom, I said, my voice dropping an octave. I'll definitely be there. I hung up, looking at the towering stack of audit folders on my desk. Friday was going to be a very busy day. I drafted an email to my lead HR consultant, Sarah, and attached the termination paperwork for Thomas and Amelia Clare. Cause, gross negligence, financial fraud, and embezzlement. I didn't just want to fire them. I wanted to burn their fraudulent kingdom to the ground. Friday morning, the sky over the city was a crisp, unforgiving gray. I arrived at Laura at 9:45 a.m. for the 10 a.m. meeting. I didn't wear a simple trench coat this time. I wore a tailored slate gray Tom Ford power suit, killer stilettos, and an expression made of ice. I bypassed the front entrance using the private owner's key card Arthur had given me to enter through the executive office in the back. Sarah, my HR director, and two large, impeccably dressed private security contractors were already waiting for me. "Good morning, Clara," Sarah said, handing me a sleek black folder containing the final audit reports and termination letters. "The staff is gathered in the main dining room. Your brother and his wife are currently holding court." "Perfect. Let's not keep the regional director waiting," I replied. We walked down the long hallway toward the dining room. Through the frosted glass doors, I could hear Thomas's booming voice echoing across the vaulted ceilings. I pushed the doors open, the heavy glass swinging wide with a dramatic thud. The dining room was packed. About 40 staff members, cooks, waiters, hostesses were seated in the booths. In the center of the room, standing completely apart from the staff, were my parents. They had actual cameras around their necks. And at the front of the room, standing behind a podium like a politician about to give a victory speech, was Thomas. Amelia stood next to him, wearing a designer dress paid for by stolen wine money. When the doors opened, the room fell silent. Everyone turned to look. My mother's face instantly scrunched into a frown. "Clara, what are you doing walking in through the executive doors?" "I told you to stand in the back. The CEO of Apex is about to be here." Thomas let out a loud, theatrical sigh, adjusting his silk tie. "Unbelievable. Clara, you can't just wander into restricted areas. This is a closed corporate meeting. You need to leave before you embarrass me in front of the new owners." I didn't stop walking. I strode directly down the center aisle, the sharp click of my heels echoing off the marble floors. Sarah and the two security guards flanked me. I stopped a few feet from the podium. I looked at my mother, then at my father, and finally I locked eyes with my brother. The smug grin on his face began to falter, replaced by a flicker of confusion as he noticed the imposing security details and the sheer authority radiating from my posture. "You're right, Thomas," I said, my voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. "This is a closed corporate meeting, and the CEO of Apex Holdings doesn't like to be kept waiting." I stepped up to the podium. I didn't push him out of the way. My sheer proximity and the hard, unyielding look in my eyes forced him to step back instinctively. I opened a black leather folder and laid it on the podium. "Good morning, everyone," I addressed the staff, completely ignoring my family for a moment. "My name is Para Clare. I'm the sole proprietor and CEO of Apex Horizon Holdings. As of 3 weeks ago, I am the new owner of Laura." A collective gasp rippled through the staff. A waiter in the back actually dropped his pen. "Clara, what kind of sick joke is this?" My mother snapped, stepping forward, her face turning red. "Stop this nonsense right now. You work in IT. I own an acquisition firm, Barbara," I corrected her sharply, using her first name. "I buy failing businesses, and Laura was failing spectacularly." I turned my attention back to Thomas, whose face had drained of all color. He looked like he had just swallowed a golf ball. Amelia was gripping his arm, her eyes darting between me and the security guards. "Thomas, You told Mom you were being promoted to regional director today because of your performance metrics, I said, leaning casually against the podium. Let's talk about those metrics, shall we? I pulled the first document from the folder. Over the past 18 months, food waste and unapproved comped meals have cost this establishment over $400,000. You haven't been running a restaurant, you've been running a soup kitchen for your frat brothers. You can't be, Thomas stammered, his voice cracking. This is my restaurant. It's my building. My brand. My payroll, I fired back, my voice slicing through the air like a whip. I pulled out the second document. And Amelia, your curated wine cellar. The forensic accountants found the shell company you set up in Delaware, buying $12 Merlot, printing fake labels and charging our guests $400 a bottle while pocketing the difference. That's not just a fireable offense, Amelia. That's a felony. Amelia let out a strangled gasp, clapping a hand over her mouth. My father finally spoke up, his voice shaking. Clara, please, let's handle this privately. This is family. Family? I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Family is what you claimed to be when you humiliated me at that table right there. I pointed to the exact booth where they had ambushed me. You stuck me with a $3,000 bill to make me feel small, to prop up the golden boy. Well, here is the reality check. I turned to Sarah. She stepped forward, handing 2 envelopes to Thomas and Amelia. Thomas Clare, Amelia Clare. You are both terminated effective immediately for gross negligence, financial mismanagement, and theft, I stated clearly. You will receive no severance. Furthermore, Apex Holdings' legal team has drafted a demand letter for the restitution of the $142,000 you directly embezzled. You have 30 days to repay it, or we will hand the forensic audit over to the district attorney. You bitch, Amelia shrieked, tears of panic finally spilling over. You set us up. I didn't force you to steal, Amelia. I just read the ledger, I replied coldly. Security will escort you both to your offices to collect your personal belongings. You have 15 minutes before you are trespassing. The security guard stepped forward. Thomas looked entirely broken. The unearned confidence, the arrogance, the smug superiority had completely shattered. He looked at my parents for help, but Barbara and Richard were frozen in shock, staring at me as if they were looking at a stranger. Clara, please, Thomas whispered, his voice trembling. The Jeep, the mortgage. I can't lose this job, I'll lose everything. Not sure that mad so the dream. Then you should have learned how to wash dishes, I said, quoting his exact insult from the dinner. I watched as the security guard led the crying, protesting couple out of the dining room. I then turned to my parents. They looked incredibly small, standing in the middle of a room that suddenly felt very hostile to them. Mom, Dad, the coronation is over. You can see yourselves out. Clara, my mother started, her voice wavering, attempting a placating smile. We didn't know. If we had known how successful you were, we would have treated me like a human being. I finished for her. I know. And that's exactly why you will never see a dime of my money. They left in silence. I turned back to the remaining staff. They looked terrified, unsure if they were all about to be fired. I took a deep breath, letting the icy demeanor melt away, replacing it with the professional, supportive tone I used with my actual teens. To the rest of you, I smiled. Thank you for your patience. As of today, wages are increasing by 15% across the board. The tip pool manipulation is over. We are closing for 2 weeks for renovations and menu updates, and you will all be paid for the downtime. Let's get to work. The room erupted into applause. The aftermath was exactly what I expected. Thomas and Amelia couldn't pay the $142,000. They had to sell their house, surrender the leased Jeep, and move into my parents' basement. Amelia divorced him 6 months later when the money officially dried up. My parents tried to reach out multiple times, suddenly eager to reconnect with their brilliant daughter. But my assistant screens all my calls now. Aura reopened a month later under a new name, with a new Michelin-starred chef, and it has been booked solid ever since. Sometimes the best response to toxic family isn't an argument. It's an undeniable, irrefutable takeover. Success is the best revenge, but buying their workplace and firing them for cause is a close second. Don't let anyone diminish your worth, especially those who share your DNA. If you enjoyed this story of absolute karma, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a victory, and subscribe for more.